Two kids secretly swapped their teacher's birthday candles with firecrackers. They both got expelled for that stunt. Decades later, one became a wealthy, celebrated painter, while the other was still a retired railway worker scraping by. The successful painter moved back to the countryside to retire and wanted to hire a gardener to fix up his neglected yard. To his surprise, the man who showed up was his old firecracker classmate. Thanks to their childhood bond, the gardener landed the gig without a hitch. From then on, both their lives changed forever. He carefully planned out the wasteland in front of the painter's house. This patch of overgrown weeds, in his mind, was already hanging heavy with fruit. He could practically smell the harvest already. He wasn't a rich man, but he had the warmest heart. And he put real care into every little detail of life. Even picking out an ordinary scythe, he'd take his sweet time. The painter figured a scythe's just a scythe. But to the gardener, it wasn't just a tool. It was his way of having a conversation with nature itself. No matter what the task, he gave it everything he had. The painter was different though. He liked to observe the world around him and paint everything he saw.
Ah, tu regardes jamais le soleil se coucher, les étoiles, la brume?
La brume? Quand il y a de la brume, il n'y a pas grand-chose à voir.
La neige en hiver, la peau d'une femme?
La peau d'une femme, c'est pas pareil. C'est des choses qu'on voit sans dire qu'on les regarde.
The painter showed the gardener his work and talked about how he'd spent all these years. The gardener listened, completely captivated. It was a life nothing like his own, so dazzling it felt like floating on clouds, or maybe a dream. The biggest wish the gardener ever had was probably to marry the woman he fell for at first sight. But she married someone else.
Ça t'a fait mal?
Sur le moment, oui. Mais j'y pense plus jamais. C'est loin tout ça.
Seems like everyone takes a hit like that on the way to growing up. The past eventually fades, but the ache gets tangled up with the memories. So looking back turns into a bitterness that stings all over again. But compared to things you can't touch, the gardener cared more about whether his scythe felt right in his hands. A good scythe needs the perfect weight and balance. Otherwise, your arms and back give out fast. When you're mowing, you should hear that clean swishing sound. The painter couldn't figure out the gardener, and the gardener couldn't stand how the painter handled his marriage. The painter had flings with several of his models, which drove his wife to file for divorce. But he still thought she was being unreasonable, because in his mind, physical stuff was just a game. As long as his heart belonged to her, that should be enough. The gardener didn't argue, but he sure didn't agree. He never got to marry the woman he loved most, but he understood that life isn't just about love. There's also the responsibility of being a husband. For his family, he worked hard every single day. He quit smoking and drinking, and with the money he saved, he'd take his family to the seaside every year. They couldn't afford anything fancy, but watching his wife bathed in sunlight, he felt it was all worth it. If they could take a stroll, have a complimentary hotel lunch, enjoy a lazy afternoon nap, and then sit together by the sea in the evening breeze, he'd say that was the finest thing in the world. The gardener showed the painter a whole different way to live, and as they spent more time together, it felt like they'd found that old brotherhood from when they were kids. When he came to work, the gardener would sometimes bring the painter some bread. Not wanting to dirty the house, he'd take off his shoes on his own. Inside those yellow rain boots weren't socks, but house slippers his wife had sewn by hand. The gardener couldn't understand why the painter came back to this middle of nowhere. The painter said it was because this was his hometown. His father had wanted him to take over the family pharmacy, but his dream was to paint, so he ran away from home and never came back. It wasn't until his parents passed 3 years ago that he returned to the old house. There, he discovered his father had painted quite a few landscapes. Clearly, his father was every bit as talented, but for the sake of making a living, his father let that go. That's when the painter finally began to understand his father.
Il a bien caché son jeu, mon pauvre père. Ce jour-là, j'ai compris que lui, il n'avait pas osé dire non, et que l'affaire familiale, il fallait qu'il la reprenne, c'était comme ça et pas autrement.
Et la pharmacie, il l'a gardée.
The painter finally realized that it was precisely his father's sacrifice that gave him the freedom to chase his own dream. Now his own family life was a mess, and he was sick of all the schmoozing in Paris. So he chose to come back home, hoping to find himself again. Knowing the gardener didn't drink alcohol or coffee, the painter bought him some tea. And to make it easier for him to tend the yard, he'd leave his keys with the gardener whenever he went to Paris. Since the painter didn't want the gardener calling him boss, they made a deal. The gardener would call him Mr. Brush, and he'd call the gardener Mr. Garden. The gardener had no talent for art, but he had real wisdom when it came to living.
Toujours avoir un couteau avec soi. Et aussi, un morceau de ficelle. Ça peut te sauver la mise n'importe où. Oublie jamais ça.
Even though the sky was perfectly clear, he warned Mr. Brush to drive carefully. Rain was coming, and sure enough, he was right on the money. That kind of seasoned instinct won Mr. Brush over completely. It also made him even more fed up with all the empty talk in high society. By the time Mr. Brush came back to the cottage, the gardener had already coaxed seedlings out of the soil, and the walls had been freshly whitewashed. When the gardener saw the woman the painter brought back, he assumed she was his wife. So he gave her a warm and hearty greeting. After everything that happened, the painter still figured that instead of trying to win his wife back, it was easier to date a young student. The gardener didn't approve of how he lived, but he was wise enough to keep his mouth shut. Even though the gardener had been retired from the railway for years, he still held on to his rule of never being late. But one day, he showed up behind schedule. The painter didn't mind, but he town. The deceased had such a ridiculous name that they nearly burst out laughing. To avoid embarrassing themselves, they practically ran out of there. In that moment, passing didn't feel so heavy anymore. It was as natural as flowers blooming and leaves falling. You can miss someone, but you don't have to grieve too hard. Hanging around the gardener, the painter slowly came down from his head in the cloud's existence. He became more grounded, and his paintings seemed to carry a new warmth to them. The gardener's rough words always had a nugget of truth tucked inside, like how nobody can go a whole life without getting sick, but you can choose to live in a healthy way. The painter would also share tips about painting with the gardener. A painter's eyes can't just focus on what's in front of them. You have to see where the next light will come from, how the wind will shift. But the gardener just wanted to do each small thing in front of him well before he retired. All he wanted was to be a good railway worker. Now that he was a gardener, he just wanted to tend the land right. He told the painter to take more walks when inspiration dried up. If there were more vegetables than they could eat, give some to the housekeeper or the neighbors. But don't give away too much, because people have their pride. Whatever's really left over, preserve it. That way, you can still eat your own harvest come winter. They were mid-conversation when it suddenly started raining. The painter caught a cold the very next day, but the gardener was perfectly fine. He even showed up all excited to show off his brand new motorcycle. The gardener walked the painter through every part of it. And just like the gardener didn't understand art, the painter didn't understand motorcycles. The gardener said a little cold doesn't need a doctor. Those doctors love scaring people just to sell medicine. He'd been planning to invite the painter to go fishing, going on and on about all the benefits of fishing. But the painter said he needed to go to Paris for a few days. Before the painter could even leave, he found the gardener doubled over on the ground, clutching his stomach in pain. The painter rushed over. The gardener said the doctor had guessed it was a hernia, but the painter didn't think it looked like one. He insisted on taking him to Paris for a proper checkup. The gardener was in too much pain to argue, so he went along to the painter's place in Paris. That night before bed, he gathered the courage to ask the painter for a favor.
Si je venais à perdre la tête, si ça t'embête pas, je veux pas te faire du tracas, mais si tu pouvais...
Vas-y, dis toujours.
J'aimerais bien que tu me peignes des choses qui me tiennent à cœur.
Mais comme quoi, par exemple?
Oh, tu connais mes idées, mes goûts. Ça n'a pas besoin d'être bien fini, mais juste un peu de couleur pour que je me souvienne.
J'essaierai de te faire ça. Allez, bonne nuit du jardin.
Bonne nuit du pinceau.
The next day, the painter took the gardener around Paris. Every corner seemed to hold memories of him and his wife. Then he took him to see an art exhibition. But the gardener seemed to have aged overnight. He barely had the energy to talk. So the painter rushed to get him into surgery. Before the operation, he went out and bought the gardener a red helmet, a perfect match for his new motorcycle. But then the doctor said it was terminal. Surgery was no longer an option.
Et il lui reste combien de temps?
Je sais pas, je peux pas dire, mais pas très longtemps, je crois.
Even though the painter had been through his share of loss, facing it again still felt unbearable. But the gardener seemed at peace with it. He was the one doing the comforting.
T'as vu, il y a des fils de partout. Je suis câblé comme une télé. Ah, le temps me dure déjà. Enfin, comme on dit, je le tue. À moins que ce soit le contraire, celui qui me tue.
The gardener said life is like a rain shower. Rain is born in the sky and dies on the ground. That stretch of falling in between, that's a lifetime. No need to be sad, no need for regret, because his life had already borne plenty of fruit. The only thing he couldn't let go of was his wife, who loved him so deeply. But every goodbye makes you grow a little. He believed his wife would find her way through, and the painter needed to walk his own path now.
Allez, va. Je t'ai assez vu. Et merci du pinceau.
Salut du jardin.
Inspired by the gardener, the painter decided to make things right with his wife. She didn't turn him away. Instead, she sat down with him at a café and listened to everything that had happened. Without thinking, the painter brought up the last time he saw their daughter.
J'ai été idiot avec elle, j'aurais dû laisser glisser. C'est sa vie après tout. De toute manière, ce que je dis ou rien.
Détrompe-toi, ce que tu dis, ça compte. La preuve, elle a rompu.
À cause de moi.
Bah, peut-être. À savoir.
Seeing he wasn't doing well, his wife canceled her plans and decided to give the painter one more chance. The day the gardener was discharged, the painter met his wife. The gardener had always said his wife had beautiful eyes, so he asked the painter what color were his own wife's eyes. The painter froze. After all these years of marriage, he realized he'd never really noticed. When the gardener heard the painter had reconciled with his wife, he was over the moon. The first thing he did when he got home was invite the painter to go fishing. They arrived at a lake as clear as a gemstone. The gardener shared a lifetime of fishing wisdom with him. The most important thing is patience, because a big fish is like death. It always lurks quietly nearby, mouth open, inching closer. One careless moment and it'll drag you right under. And the painter, protected by beginner's luck, seemed to bring the gardener some good fortune. Before long, they reeled in a big carp.
T'as vu ses yeux? Hein? T'as vu comment on nous regarde? Comme la mort, je te dis. C'est tout méchanceté, ça.
But the gardener quickly realized that now he was the one playing the role of death. This fish fighting for its life was just like him, walking toward the end. This was actually the third time the gardener had caught this fish, and the last. He decided to let it go, just like the first 2 times.
Allez, adieu, ma belle.
Watching it slowly disappear beneath the surface, the gardener felt a flood of emotions, how he wished death would give him one more chance too. But clearly that wasn't going to happen. All he could do was make the most of the days he had left. The gardener wanted the painter to do a portrait of his wife. When it came to the eyes, he'd oversee that part himself. The painter did as he asked, and finished everything except the eyes. And that's when he got the news that the gardener had passed away.
Je passerai plus tard. Courage.
After that, the painter never hired another gardener. He chose to tend the yard himself. He also held an exhibition in Paris. Every painting was inspired by the world inside the gardener's heart.
J'aimerais bien que tu me peignes des choses qui me tiennent à cœur. Ça n'a pas besoin d'être bien fini, mais juste un peu de couleur pour que je me souvienne.
There's no such thing as a perfect canvas in life. Crooked lines and wrong colors happen all the time. When we're young, we always want to erase and start over. Later you realize, those stumbles, those disappointments, they're not mistakes. They're the road you've walked. Without them, the painting would just be too clean. What this film teaches us is, don't be afraid to make a mess, and don't be afraid to let people see it. Every mark you leave, someone out there will understand. The canvas is only so big. Time is only so long. So paint with everything you've got, and leave the rest to that someone willing to sit down and look at the painting with you.